My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 72 years old, and for 34 years I proudly served in the United States Army. I survived 2 wars, buried friends who never came home, and came back believing nothing could ever break me again. But I was wrong. The deepest wound of my life wasn't made by an enemy. It was made by my own son. 3 weeks ago, I woke up in a hospital bed after suffering a massive heart attack while repairing the fence behind my house in Texas. My body was weak, but my ears still worked. I couldn't open my eyes, and I couldn't move a single finger. Then I heard my son Ethan whisper to the doctor, "If there's no hope, pull the life support. He has nothing left anyway." Those words shattered me. The little boy I once carried on my shoulders, the boy whose nightmares I chased away, was ready to let me die. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't unconscious. I heard every single word, and he also had no idea that inside an old green military locker locked away in my garage was a secret that would destroy every lie he had built. If you've ever trusted the wrong family member, stay with me, because this story proves that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. After my wife Emily died from breast cancer 4 years ago, everything changed. Our house became painfully quiet. Every morning, I still made 2 cups of coffee before remembering she wasn't there anymore. Ethan started visiting more often. At first, I thought he simply missed his father. He hugged me, brought groceries, helped mow the lawn, and constantly reminded me that I shouldn't be living alone. I believed every word because I wanted to believe I had raised a good man. But slowly, his questions changed. He stopped asking how I felt and started asking about my finances. "Dad, how much is the house worth now? Dad, did Mom leave you any investments? Dad, do you still have your military pension?" At first, I laughed them off. I thought he was just curious. Looking back now, I realized he wasn't asking out of love. He was taking inventory. Every visit felt less like seeing a son and more like an accountant inspecting assets. One Sunday, he brought his wife, Amanda. She walked through my home with her phone out, taking pictures of every room. She smiled and said, "This place would look amazing after a renovation. Not your home, not Dad's house, just another investment waiting to be flipped." I should have noticed the warning signs then. But loneliness has a way of making you ignore things your heart doesn't want to accept. A few months later, Ethan insisted on helping organize my paperwork. "Dad, you're getting older. If something happens, someone needs to know where everything is." It sounded reasonable. I trusted him. I handed him old tax records, insurance papers, military documents, and bank statements. He carefully scanned everything into his laptop while smiling like the perfect son. What I didn't know was that he wasn't organizing my life. He was mapping out everything I owned. One evening, I walked into the garage and caught him staring at my old military locker. It was scratched, faded, and covered with dust from decades of storage. "What's inside?" he asked casually. I smiled. "Just old memories from the army." He laughed. "Probably nothing valuable then." I nodded and quietly changed the subject. That locker had traveled with me across 2 continents. Everyone believed it held old uniforms, medals, and faded photographs. Even Emily never knew the full truth because I promised another soldier I'd keep the secret until the right time came. That promise had followed me for over 30 years. Weeks passed, and Ethan became strangely impatient. He kept encouraging me to sell the house. "Dad, assisted living would be safer. You deserve to relax." But every brochure he showed me featured facilities hours away from my hometown. Too far for neighbors, too far for old friends, too far for anyone who might notice if something wasn't right. Then came the morning everything changed. While fixing my backyard fence, I felt a crushing pain spread across my chest. My vision blurred, and I collapsed onto the grass. The next thing I remember was hearing ambulance sirens fading into darkness. When I woke again, I couldn't move. Machines beeped beside me. Doctors whispered outside the curtain. Then Ethan entered the room. His voice sounded calm, almost rehearsed. "Doctor, if recovery isn't likely, I don't think Dad would want to suffer." The doctor hesitated. "We need more time." Amanda answered before Ethan could. "He's old. His quality of life is already gone. We should let him go peacefully." I wanted to scream. I wanted to open my eyes and tell them I was still there, but my body refused to obey. Minutes later, I heard Amanda whisper something that froze my blood. "Once this is over, we'll finally be able to sell the house." Ethan quietly replied, "And don't forget the garage. Dad always protected that old locker like it was treasure." Amanda laughed softly. "After he's gone, we'll break it open." At that exact moment, lying helpless in a hospital bed, I realized they weren't waiting for me to recover. They were waiting for me to die. And if they ever opened that military locker, they'd uncover something that would not only destroy their future, it would expose a truth powerful enough to change every life standing in that hospital forever. 3 days passed before I could finally move my fingers. The doctors called it a miracle, but I called it unfinished business. I didn't tell anyone that I had heard every conversation while lying helpless in that hospital bed. I acted weak. I pretended my memory was fading. Every time Ethan visited, he smiled with fake concern and asked, "Dad, do you remember what happened?" I looked confused and quietly replied, "Not much, son." The relief on his face told me everything I needed to know. He believed I was vulnerable now. He believed I had become an old man who could be manipulated. A week later, the doctors discharged me. Ethan insisted I stay at his house until I recovered. "It's safer, Dad," he said. But I politely refused and returned home alone. The moment I stepped into my garage, I stood in front of the old military locker for several minutes. My hands trembled as I unlocked it with the small brass key I had worn around my neck for over 30 years. Inside were old uniforms, faded photographs, service medals, and beneath a false metal panel was a thick waterproof envelope. Inside that envelope were original military documents, a notarized journal, video recordings, and papers proving ownership of something almost no one knew existed. In 1993, during a classified humanitarian mission overseas, my best friend Sergeant Michael Hayes had died protecting innocent civilians. Before his final mission, he made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I would protect the evidence exposing millions of dollars stolen by a corrupt military contractor. For decades, that evidence stayed hidden because multiple investigations had failed. Years later, after the government reopened the case, I secretly testified. The contractor was convicted, and as part of the legal settlement, I received a confidential financial award and became trustee of a veterans foundation established in Michael's name. That foundation now controlled millions of dollars dedicated to helping wounded veterans and military families. But there was one condition written into the trust. If I ever became mentally incompetent or died unexpectedly, the trustees would immediately investigate anyone attempting to gain control of my personal estate before releasing a single dollar. Ethan had absolutely no idea that chasing my small savings account and old house had already placed him under the attention of people far more experienced than he could imagine. The very next morning, my phone rang. "Mr. Carter, this is Rebecca Lawson from the Hayes Veterans Foundation. We received notice of your recent hospitalization. We just wanted to make sure everything is all right." I took a deep breath and quietly answered, "Rebecca, I think someone in my own family is waiting for me to die." Silence filled the line before she calmly replied, "Don't touch anything. Don't tell anyone. We'll be there tomorrow." Less than 24 hours later, 2 attorneys and a retired military investigator arrived at my home. I told them everything. The hospital conversation, Ethan's sudden interest in my finances, Amanda's comments about the garage, every strange question they had asked during the past year. The investigator listened carefully before saying something that made my heart sink. "Mr. Carter, we've seen this before. Elder financial exploitation usually starts with kindness, then isolation, then paperwork, then control." He asked one final question. "Has your son asked you to sign anything recently?" I slowly nodded. 2 days before my heart attack, Ethan had left several documents on my kitchen table, saying they were emergency medical forms. I never signed them because I got busy repairing the fence outside. The investigator requested to see the papers. After reading them for less than 30 seconds, his face turned cold. "These aren't medical forms. These are power of attorney documents, giving your son complete legal authority over your finances, property, and investments." My chest tightened. If I had signed those papers, everything I owned would have legally belonged under Ethan's control. The investigator quietly closed the folder and looked directly into my eyes. "Mr. Carter, I don't think your heart attack was the beginning of this story. I think it was simply the moment their plan almost succeeded. At that exact moment, my security camera sent a notification to my phone. Someone was standing outside my garage, staring directly at the military locker through the window. I checked the security camera again. The man standing outside wasn't a stranger. It was Ethan. He looked around carefully before pulling a small crowbar from the back of his truck and walking toward my garage door. The retired investigator beside me didn't panic. He simply smiled and whispered, "Don't stop him yet." We watched as Ethan forced the garage door open and walked straight toward the old military locker. His hands were shaking with excitement. "This is it," he whispered to himself. "Whatever Dad has been hiding, it's finally mine." The moment he touched the locker, 2 local detectives stepped into the garage. "Don't move." Ethan froze. His face turned white as the crowbar slipped from his hand. He tried to laugh and said, "This is my father's house. I'm just checking on him." But the investigator calmly handed the officers copies of the security footage showing Ethan breaking into the property. Minutes later, Amanda arrived, screaming that everything was a misunderstanding. Then she saw me walk into the garage, alive, standing on my own feet. The smile disappeared from her face. I looked at my son and quietly asked, "Were you planning to visit me? Or were you planning to rob me before I came home?" Ethan couldn't answer. Instead, he lowered his head. I opened the military locker myself. Inside were old medals, photographs, and finally the sealed military envelope. Rebecca Lawson handed the documents to the detectives and explained the truth. The locker didn't contain hidden gold or millions of dollars. It contained the original legal records proving that I was the trustee of the Hayes Veterans Foundation, along with video testimony and protected evidence that had helped convict a corrupt defense contractor years earlier. Those documents were under federal protection. Attempting to steal or destroy them carried serious criminal penalties. Ethan stared at me in disbelief. You were never hiding money?" I slowly shook my head. "No, son. I was protecting another soldier's final promise." Tears filled his eyes, but it was too late. The detectives informed him that the attempted break-in, the forged power of attorney documents, and the evidence gathered over the past several weeks would all become part of the investigation. Amanda began blaming Ethan. Ethan blamed Amanda. For the first time, their lies collapsed because the truth didn't need to argue. Months later, the criminal charges were resolved. They were ordered to pay restitution for the fraud they had attempted, perform community service, and they lost every legal claim to my property. I didn't celebrate. A father never dreams of watching his own child walk into a courtroom as a defendant. That isn't victory. It's heartbreak. I updated my will that same week. My home was donated to the Hayes Veterans Foundation after my lifetime, where it would become temporary housing for wounded veterans rebuilding their lives. My personal savings went to children's cancer charities in memory of my wife, Emily. Ethan received one final letter from me. It simply said, "I spent my life teaching you that character is worth more than money. I only wish you had believed me before it was too late." Sometimes people think the greatest inheritance is wealth. They're wrong. The greatest inheritance is trust. Because once trust is stolen, not even all the money in the world can buy it back. And every time I lock that old military locker, I don't remember betrayal anymore. I remember the promise I kept to a friend who gave his life protecting others. Some treasures aren't measured in dollars. They're measured by the promises you refuse to break.